Detroit Today on 101.9 WDET. I'm your host, Stephen Henderson, and I'm really glad you have decided to join us today. We have been talking about what it means to punish others and why we do it. We've been talking about our criminal justice system and the back end of that criminal justice system when people come out of prison, try to reestablish lives for themselves, how challenging that is, how challenging we make it for them. Now we want to talk about redemption, though, and what it looks like in this country and if it's even possible. To do it, we have two really great guests. Ronnie Waters is a community engagement specialist with Safe and Just Michigan, a nonprofit that advocates for criminal justice reform. Ronnie, welcome to Detroit Today.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for having me.
And sitting beside him here in the studio is Rick Speck. He is the Leadership Programs Coordinator for Just Leadership USA, an organization that amplifies the power of people directly impacted by incarceration. Rick is also a community engagement specialist with Safe and Just Michigan. Rick, welcome to Detroit Today.
Thank you, Stephen.
And I should note that both of our guests are people who were incarcerated and are trying to put their lives back together. That's why we have them here today, to kind of share some of the challenges that we erect in their way. Ronnie, I want to start with you. First, tell us what led you to prison, and then tell us what your life was like when you left and what challenges and struggles stood in the way of you trying to rebuild your life.
Yeah. First of all, I was a wayward kid, running the streets, completely out of control, no direction, no mentorship from anyone, no father in the family, in the house, and none of that is an excuse. But I caught a first-degree murder case when I was 17 years old, went to prison for life without the possibility of parole, stayed in prison until the United States Supreme Court made a decision that juveniles should at least be looked at to see if they had some type of redeeming quality about their life. And I finally got that hearing that the Supreme Court ordered back in 2012. I finally got that hearing in 2020, and I was released and came home after 40 plus years of prison and started trying to put a life together for myself.
40 years.
40 years.
Yeah. I mean, it's every time I hear that, it just kind of goes through me to think about how much of your life you lost because you were in prison. Tell us what that was like, though, coming home and the things that made it harder, perhaps, to build your life back fully.
Yeah, it was extremely hard. I literally was living in a cave for over 40 years, cut off from technology, cut off from all the things that are going on in the free world. You get glimpses of the technology and different things, situations from the television, but it's nothing like when you step out of that prison and enter into a world that you know nothing about, a world that when you left, I think the biggest technology was three-way calling, and digital watches. And I came out where if you didn't understand how to manipulate a phone, you were lost. And fortunate for me that I had a really strong support system. I didn't have the same support system that most returning citizens have. And I was able to have a leg up because of my support system. And with all these caring and loving people in my life, it was still a struggle. And to be truthful, sometimes I still struggle, but I've surrounded myself with people who care about me and people who are invested in my future and want to see me do well. So,
are there things that you've been told or that you've perceived that you can't do or that won't be allowed to do because you were in prison?
A lot of my most of my energy and time has been invested in helping people who are returning like myself, or trying to do something to shed light on those people that I left behind. I left behind a lot of good people, a lot of capable people, a lot of people who want the opportunity to show the world that they have some redeeming qualities about their life, show the world that they're more than the worst thing that they ever did in their life. So this is who I advocate for. So in that sphere, it's more accepting than if I would have applied for a job at General Motors or DET, you know. So not trying to slander you guys, but just
Ronnie,
so,
we would be very happy to have you here. I'm just throwing that out there.
Okay, thank you.
But I get your point, right? I mean, you're doing something that probably doesn't have the same kind of barriers that other jobs.
I mean, or perceived barriers anyway. You know, I'm fortunate to get a job with an organization that this is what they do, is advocate for returning citizens, advocate for laws and policies to be changed to help people like me.
Right.
So appear to be received very very well in those circles. However, with the incident that's happened with the Supreme Court justice, with you know, me thinking that he thought in a certain way, I was convinced that this man was completely on my side. You know, had conversations with him on at least 2 or 3 times over the summer and
Justice
fall.
Bernstein?
Justice Bernstein, I'm sorry. Yeah, and I was totally convinced that this was the right man for the job with the right attitude to take care of the job. You know, he never had discussions about cases or anything that he would rule on in the future. But, you know, just generally talking to him led me to believe that he was one who believed in second chances, who believed in a person's ability to transform his life. And recently I've been really struggling with how he could trick us like that. You know, how, and I'm wondering who else is smiling in my face but really don't believe in second chances like Bernstein.
Wow. Yeah. Ronnie, that's a really powerful experience to be managing right now. Rick, I want to bring you into the conversation and get you to tell us some of the same things, the things that led you to prison and what you found coming out and in the ability to put your life back together.
Thank you, Stephen. Well, I think it's worth noting that, unfortunately, I spent multiple terms in prison. The last term was a 15-year sentence for a violent crime. And I think what was different for me when I came home the third time versus the first 2 times, one from the state and one from the federal system, was I had a similar support system, like Ronnie had said. So there's always these inherent challenges behind housing, behind employment, behind just being welcome into the community as a community member. And so when I came home this last time, I really had this epiphany when I was on the inside and worked with a nonprofit to begin to train men like myself in critical thinking, effective communication, conflict resolution. And it lit a fire in me that this is what I wanted to do. And so when I came home, I began to work with youth so that they wouldn't make the same choices that I made as a youth. But what it boiled down to for me was I didn't come from, I came from parents that have been divorced since I was probably 1. But I think for me, when I came home this last time, I wanted to do better, be better, and I had people to help support me in that. But I had taken, and during that 15 years, I had healed. What drove my choices to abuse alcohol and drugs when I was younger was harm. I was traumatized. I don't often share this, but as a young man, I was sexually assaulted and never shared that with anyone publicly until maybe 2 years ago. My wife was the first person I shared that with outside of my mother and father. But when I healed from those harms, I was able to look at life differently. I was able to experience life differently. And so when I came home, I wanted to do better. I'm a father. I have, 2 children, 2 stepchildren. I have grandchildren. unfortunately, I lost my oldest daughter to gun violence just a couple years ago.
Oh, no.
So some folks would say, how did that affect me, right? How did that affect the way I look at life? How does it affect how I look at folks that had committed a homicide in years past? And the reality is during that the absolute most challenging moment in my life, when I was dealing with the loss of my daughter, it was men like Ronnie that had committed a homicide, had taken a life. When I was angry and wanted retribution, it was those men and women that came alongside me and said, Rick, you don't want this. I promise you, this is not going to make you feel better. This is not going to make your pain go away. You do not want to do this. It was that community that I drew strength from, which you would think that's the last people I would want to talk to, right? Going through what I was going through, but that helped shape my thinking to say, yes, this is tragic. Yes, this shouldn't have happened. Does that person also deserve a chance at redemption? Yeah, we all do. But it took me a long time to come to that realization.
Yeah.
Right?
No, I can imagine.
The part that disturbs me most, and to use Justice Bernstein's words, disgusts me the most, is that we're never going to be able to get past this. You know, a great thing happened in October in Atlanta, Georgia. They made returned citizens a protected class. The city council voted unanimously. Why are they a protected class? Because we know we're discriminated in housing. We're discriminated against in employment. If we weren't, then we wouldn't have all these check-the-box campaigns going all over the country, right? I knew there was going to be challenges to what I did. I took my biggest negative and I turned it into my biggest positive and began to work in a space that I was intimately familiar with, the criminal legal system, for most of my adult life and part of my young life. That opportunity helped move me through. I'm a small business owner. You know, so when we talk about that protected class that happened in Atlanta, that happened because two sisters that were formerly incarcerated that are entrepreneurs, just like myself, had to become an entrepreneur, not because that was our first thought, it was out of necessity.
Because no one would hire you.
And then when they would hire me, it was honestly, it was at a rate that I wasn't willing to do, right? I valued myself, my skills, my talents, my passions more than minimum wage. Just like them. Well, fast forward, COVID comes. We're not eligible for the same relief as business owners. Why? Because of our conviction. That conviction can have nothing to do with finances or anything else. But yet, as a class of people, we were completely taken out of that equation. And the scary part is folks thought that was okay.
Yeah.
How is that okay?
You know, it's it is the thing that drove us to this show. Is I don't understand that either. I don't get why people don't believe in each other a little more, right? Don't believe that, look, someone can make a terrible, terrible mistake, but become somebody different, you know?
They can heal.
And have the opportunity. I want to get another voice into the conversation here before we have to end the show. Daryl Woods is someone I've known for a long time, and somebody who also has his own experience with this. Daryl, welcome to the show.
How you doing, my friend?
Hey, man. Yeah. Go ahead.
Man, these are two pioneers who have transformed their lives, and for us to deal with the trauma of what happened on last week is horrific. You're talking about, the segregation of the South, to segregate returning citizens and treat us like second-class citizens is disheartening. Thousands of returning citizens voted for Justice Bernstein. Justice Bernstein campaigned inside the Genesee County Jail and talked to the prisoners because our organizations invited him there. And so it's a lot need to be done to rectify this situation. We deserve to live in the houses that we can pay for. We deserve to work and provide for our families just like any other taxpaying citizen. And so I thank you, Steve, for always being a leader, appreciate you big time, man, and appreciate these brothers who are strong advocates and partners of mine, and being able to deal with the discrimination and the hatred that is against returning citizens.
Yeah, Daryl, and I should note all of the work that you do now to help returning citizens, but also all the work you did when you were incarcerated to lift up the souls of the people who have to live behind bars. Thanks so much for calling, Daryl. But we've only got about a minute and a half left. But I want both Ronnie and Rick to talk about what you would say to Justice Bernstein now. I mean, Ronnie, you said you've talked to him. What would you say to him if he were sitting here in the studio with us?
It's depending on who I'm talking to. If I was talking to the same person that I met on the campaign trail, I would ask him different questions. But if I have to talk to the man who made those disgusting comments about Judge Bolden, I'm just trying to figure out what changed. How all of a sudden that you could look a person in the eyes and tell them how strongly you believe in things, and then you make those comments that you made about really powerful young lady, and how you can do that without even speaking to her, how you could do that without even trying to get an understanding with her. Those conversations that he put into the public should have been held behind closed doors. And I'm sure they could have came to at least an agreement to not broadcast my business out there like that.
A better understanding.
A better understanding. So when I asked him that, and then he comes out with a statement that he apologized, I'm asking, well, what changed? How did you get religion all of a sudden? You know, I want to know.
There was a little pressure for that. We're running out of time, but I want to give Rick a chance to address it. We've got about a minute left, Rick.
I think what I would ask him, Pete Martell is a good friend of mine, somebody that came into the prison, worked with me when I was there, and was a beacon of hope and light because of what he represented behind the work that he was doing, right? The efforts that he was putting in, the change that he was making. The one thing I really, outside of his conviction, the only thing he stated is that conviction disqualifies him. To me, how? How are you disqualified? He's the most qualified, in my opinion. The only resignation that should be sought is Justice Bernstein's, in my opinion.
Pete Martell is a hero of mine.
Absolutely.
Okay. Rick Speck and Ronnie Waters, it was really great to have both of you here to talk about this. Thanks so much for joining us on Detroit Today.
Thank you for having us,
Thank you.
Steve.